All right. So hello everybody, my name is Grace Shecker. I am an intern with the Fit Phoenix program here at the City of Phoenix. I would like to welcome you all to our virtual speaker series, which is offered by both the City of Phoenix Parks and Recreation Department and Human Services Department. Tonight we have Sarah Way with us again to talk to us about another very serious topic, sexual assault awareness. Before we get started, let's review some housekeeping items. We ask that you please stay muted, and if you have any questions, type them in the chat box and I will answer them throughout the presentation. A quick reminder is at the end of the presentation, we will also have a designated Q&A section. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me back. Give me 1 second. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just bear with me just 1 second. There we go. Okay. Perfect. So thank you again for having me this evening. My name is Sarah Way. I am with the Strategic Initiatives team within the Human Services Department of the City of Phoenix. And tonight I'm going to be talking with you all about something that's very serious in our community, and that is sexual assault. So I am also one of the representatives for the Let's Talk Teal campaign, which is the city's sexual assault awareness initiative, as well as the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, which is a grant received by the Phoenix Police Department. So in beginning the conversation about the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, which we also know as SAKI. SAKI is a program that's administered through the Bureau of Justice Assistance Program, and it provides funding to support the reform of sexual assault cases. So essentially, the need for this initiative began approximately 10 to 15 years ago as sexual assault advocates began to recognize that there was a mishandling of how sexual assault kits are treated in the United States. So they were discovering that a lot of these kits had been stored improperly in large warehouses with all the windows broken out. Some of them have been lost over time, improperly tracked. And so that is what truly began the mission of the SAKI program. So since 2015 and through to 2019, the National SAKI program has sent about 58,000 sexual assault kits for testing. And of those tested, 18,657 produced a DNA profile eligible to be uploaded into the CODIS database. So the CODIS database is the national database that tracks how DNA or which DNA relates to which person who it belongs to, what kinds of crimes, provided crime scenes where DNA's profiles could be found there, and that's also how you track the matching of the DNA. So of those, 9,274 resulted in CODIS hits, with about 10,276 of those cases being investigated, and 715 of them ended in a conviction. So we're talking about almost 700 people who their kit, 700 victims possibly, their kits have been sitting for years, and they had never had any justice. And so this grant program has allowed us to convict that many more offenders. And every day, more entries are being entered and more new matches are being made. So that's wonderful. So some of our goals, we, on my team, we are trying to raise public awareness about sexual assault and really emphasize the importance of reporting to law enforcement and receiving a medical forensic exam. So today I'm really going to be talking to you all about what exactly constitutes sexual assault, how does it differ from sexual abuse, and what exactly happens during a medical exam after a sexual assault, as well as to provide a guideline of coordinated practices and resources that may be used following a sexual assault. So the real scope of the problem, we are talking about amongst the children population, 82% of all victims under 18 are female. Females ages 16 to 19 are 4 times more likely than the general population to be victims of attempted or completed sexual assault. And 1 in 9 females and 1 in 53 males under the age of 18 experience sexual abuse or assault. So we're really talking about a very large portion of our community. And I think it's also really important for us to examine these numbers because a lot of times people who have undergone sexual assault, they kind of feel like they're maybe the only ones that have experienced that, or they feel uncomfortable talking about it because maybe that's not something that can be talked about amongst people that they know. And 93% of perpetrators to children are known to the victim. So once again, we're talking family members, trusted adults in these children's lives. Um, it's way more common than we think about. And then as far as adults, every 73 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. So this is happening all the time. Um, we have found that about 90% of the victims are female. 1 out of every 10 sexual assault victims are male. 55% of assaults occur at or near the home of the victim. And about only 230 out of every 1,000 sexual assaults are reported. 1 out of every 6 American women has been the victim of an attempted or completed sexual assault in her lifetime. And so these stats come to us from the organization called RAIN. They have a tremendous amount of information if you're interested in learning more about the scope of sexual assault. I know sometimes the numbers can be a little confusing. So they have an amazing website called rain.org, and that is RAINN.org. So what exactly are some examples of sexual offenses? I think that we generally understand, intercourse and perhaps oral sex. We understand those as sexual offenses, but there's actually a wider variety. So between adults and children as victims, we also see sexual assaults occurring between married persons or partners, and again, one of the reasons why this is so important to talk about is because some people, they don't believe that sexual assault can occur between 2 married people or 2 partners, but uh, honestly, every single incident of a sexual act, it has to have something called consent every single time. And so we are going to be revisiting that concept shortly. Um, so we also see forms of sexual harassment. So, you know, there can be a sexual offense even without people being able to actually touch each other. But a lot of the kinds of harassment that we see are using technology. So this is, there's a concept called revenge porn. So that is where one person will abuse perhaps photographs or, social media accounts with, pictures that contain nudity and send that to other people or post that online without their consent. So that is within itself a form of sexual harassment. We also see exposure and voyeurism, which are 2 other types of sexual offenses. So exposure is being where, one person forces other people, their victim, to view them perhaps naked, And then voyeurism is the opposite. So that is when the perpetrator, uh, without the victim knowing, is viewing them, undressing or in a state of undress. We also have what's just called sexual abuse, which I will be addressing in the next slide as to how that differs from sexual assault legally. And then we also have incest, which is, sexual acts between people who are related to each other. So that is a form of abuse that we see often, where the perpetrator is a family member and perhaps their victim might be their child or their parent or some other combination. So, what exactly is sexual assault and what is abuse? So, so the state of Arizona statute states that sexual assault is when a person knowingly engages in intercourse or oral sexual contact, and that is without consent or when the victim is under 18 years old. And so in considering what consent is as far as the legal definition of sexual assault, we are talking about a person who is not old enough to consent, or a person who, for some reason, is incapacitated. So that can be a cognitive delay, that can be a person who's too intoxicated to be able to consent. And then, what exactly is sexual abuse under the legal code? So, that is forms of touching. So, for adults, this would be touching or contact without consent. And for people who are under 18, it is any touching because, again, they cannot legally consent. And also the touching of the breasts for people who are under 15 years old. So, and again, I know that these definitions can be a little difficult to understand, but if you do have questions about this, please feel free to reach out to me, or also you can reach out to RAIN, the organization that I had just discussed, or you can go directly to the police department as well. So outside of, I guess, what we would consider the obvious of what exactly is sexual assault, some other forms that are very common but aren't commonplace to talk about are when, for example, an abuser takes a photo or touches your body without permission, for somebody to force a victim to participate in or watch videos of a pornographic nature. We're also talking about people who are forced, coerced, or manipulated into touching another person's body without permission. But truly, the most important thing here is that an abuser can be anyone, and a victim can be anyone. But it's really, it's really important that we don't start to think about that all perpetrators of sexual assault or abuse look a certain way, because I think that is when we get into the area of misidentification. When we have victims who aren't feeling heard, aren't feeling recognized, and you know they don't want to tell anyone about what happened to them because they have an idea that nobody will believe that their abuser could be, someone close to them or somebody who seems otherwise trustworthy. So, going back to the idea of consent and how important this is, because truly consent underlines not only just basic human respect and dignity in relationships, but also really goes into the legal definition of sexual assault. So, consent means full permission from start to finish of an act. Previous sexual contact is not consent to a new experience. So, this again goes back to how you can absolutely have sexual assault within relationships, within a marriage. Previously saying yes does not mean that a person is saying yes right now. The person must consent. So, if they consent to one activity, it does not mean that they consent to all activities. That's why it's very important for consent to be reaffirmed throughout any act. They must have the ability to agree. So again, if a person who is underage, is, too intoxicated or has any cognitive delays, they would not then be able to consent. And truly, the most important thing here is that communication is the key to ensuring consent from start to finish of every act. So, how exactly do we respond to sexual assault here in Phoenix? So, there's several ways, but usually law enforcement is often the first responder of a sexual assault case. So that can be when a victim, calls 911 or they go to their local police precinct. Either way, they will often be met with a patrol officer. So from there, the investigations typically include both an initial victim interview in the response phase and then later more in-depth interviews in the investigative phase. So this is when, it's more of the basic fact finding, who, what, when, where, why, or not why, but who, what, when, and where. And so if the victim is willing, law enforcement will then transport the victim to a local advocacy center or hospital for a medical forensic exam. So this is a really important piece of the process because, like we started to touch on earlier, that is when any evidence that is collected from the crime scene, which in this case, a sexual assault, the person is one of the forms of the crime scene. So the exam is a very important piece of the process because that's where they're collecting all of that evidence. From there, if the perpetrator is known, the evidence can be collected through a court order, search warrant, or with consent. And then from there, after the investigations are complete, then the prosecution process can begin. So what exactly are the victim's options after an assault? So first, they have the option of making a law enforcement report. They are afforded the opportunity to have a medical forensic exam, which is a completely free exam. It does not get processed through the victim's health insurance. They also have options to undergo the exam confidentially and anonymously. So they can have their forensic nurse examiner uh, provide the exam to them, and they're able to give that the specimens that are collected as DNA. They can give that to law enforcement without actually identifying themselves. So they can still help to contribute to, like we discussed, the collection of the DNA and putting that into the databases. And they could do that anonymously. There's also a tremendous amount of advocacy and supportive services here in Phoenix that the victim has the option of engaging with. And again, any one of these options, they don't have to participate in the other ones. So if they just wanted to have the exam and speak to an advocate without contacting law enforcement, they have that option as well. And we do have a process here in Phoenix, which is called a VAWA exam. And that is where they can have the medical forensic exam with no police report. So, what exactly are the rights of a victim? So, amongst children, if an adult that is responsible for the care of a child or minor has observed or examined the individual and has reason to believe that they are a victim of sexual assault, the adult is required by law to report it. So, this is the concept of mandated reporting, which technically all adults in society are mandated reporters. If you know of a child that's been abused, then it is your responsibility to report that. And for adults, they have the decision to report their sexual assault to law enforcement if they want to or if they don't want to. They don't have to. That is their right as a victim of sexual assault. So, what exactly is a forensic medical examination? So first, it is a free medical exam to all victims. It is recommended to be completed within the first 5 days following an assault, no matter if the victim chooses to report it to law enforcement. So there's a few different reasons why it is supposed to be within 5 days, but essentially it is about making sure that they can capture the evidence in time. But if a person has been assaulted and it has been past 5 days, it is still highly suggested that they still seek out medical treatment. Even if they're not able to do this exact form of forensic examination, it is still very important for them to seek out medical treatment otherwise. And so the forensic nurse examiner is a specific, highly trained type of medical practitioner. And so what they do during the exam is they will do an internal and external exam of the body. Um, every part of the exam is the victim can choose whether or not they want to do each part. So if they say, I'm comfortable with you examining me externally, but I'd prefer not the internal exam, that's completely up to them. And the nurses, the nurses are trained to know to stop if the victim no longer consents to that particular piece. They also collect evidence. So they have, they have a full kit of swabs, and they know exactly where to collect from the body as to collect evidence that would be suitable for the court of law. And then they would probably tell you that most importantly, they provide medical care. So they are able to provide any sorts of medications that a victim might need based on the specific sexual assault experience that they had. They're able to prevent STIs, um, possibly prevent pregnancy, and just provide them all of the any medications and referrals that they might need going forward. So, what exactly is collected for a sexual assault kit? So, first off, it definitely differs from case to case. So, again, depending on the specific sexual assault experience that victim underwent, that is going to determine what exactly the nurse is going to collect. So, but a few things, they will collect clothing that's often contains different forms of evidence. They use swabs to be processed for DNA evidence. They will often take photographs of the body and to document any injuries. And they will also collect a known standard DNA from the victim. So that is just to capture the victim's DNA so that they're able to compare what they find to know that it's a different person. And so what exactly happens to the sexual assault kit after the exam is completed? So first, it is impounded as evidence, which is kept by first the Phoenix Police Department and then the crime lab. It is sent to the forensic crime laboratory. It is then tested for DNA evidence, and a DNA profile that is obtained and then entered into a database, and that is then preserved for future analysis. Because a lot of times after a sexual assault and they capture this DNA, um, sometimes they might not know, the victim might not know who their perpetrator was. They might not, it might be a stranger to them. So unless you have, a person a possible perpetrator that you can compare that DNA to, they might not be able to compare that DNA to anyone immediately after the assault. So, so what can a person do after an assault? If, unfortunately, if it is a viewer of this presentation, or if it's a loved one, comes up to you and says, I've just been assaulted, I don't know where to go from here. It's highly suggested to call 911 to report the assault. Because not only can this help with a possible criminal investigation, but they know this process. They can transport to the forensic nurse examiner, and it's also very important to preserve any evidence. So this is trying to keep your clothing. Try not to use the restroom. Don't brush your teeth. So there's a few different things that it's suggested that a person does if they have just been assaulted. And, you know, one of those things would be to not take a shower. Try to keep everything intact until you're able to see the nurse. And so then after that, receiving the medical attention, again, they are able to treat or document any injuries. They're able to prescribe any medications that might be able to prevent STIs or pregnancy. And then after that, start the healing process. This is going to look different for everybody. But we do have a lot of resources available in Phoenix, specifically with therapists, support groups. When people need assistance trying to get like an order of protection or injunction against harassment, these services are available. So, what are some of the common side effects from surviving a sexual assault? There's a wide variety, and there's not really any that are normal nor are abnormal, meaning that it's really whatever that particular victim is going through, that is your normal. A few side effects that we see trust issues, feeling angry or blaming people, or blaming oneself. I mean, that's truly that's the sad product of survival sometimes. Feeling shock, feeling numb, feeling the loss of control, feeling disoriented, feeling helpless, feeling a sense of vulnerability, um, being afraid, feeling fearful, blaming oneself for possibly allowing the crime to happen. Um, and then we also see some different physical effects too. There's bruising or bleeding. We can see sexually transmitted infections, soreness, PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. We see nightmares, flashbacks, anxiety, depression, feelings of hopelessness, feeling easily distracted, or feeling a loss of energy. And unfortunately, some people do experience suicidal thoughts. So that's a very overwhelming list. However, I think that when we can acknowledge that these can be the byproduct of a sexual assault, and people who are really feeling these things, this is normal. This is normal. There's nothing wrong with you for feeling this way. And I would just ask if anybody is feeling this way to please reach out for help. We have quite a few different resources here in Phoenix to be able to at least walk alongside you. So, speaking of one of the amazing resources that we have here in Phoenix, we have the Family Advocacy Center, which is a city program that is not affiliated with law enforcement, but they do have good connections with law enforcement to that can help assist victims who have been assaulted and might be needing some help connecting with with their detective, or who need help walking alongside them through a criminal investigation. But even outside of for having participated with law enforcement, they are still able to provide crisis intervention, emergency needs assistance, safety planning, emergency shelter assistance, protective orders, victims compensation program assistance, short-term counseling and support group referrals, criminal case assistance and victims' rights education, as well as court escorts for different proceedings. Because sometimes victims who are engaged in a trial process, or with the investigation, they might not want their family to come with them sometimes, or they feel more comfortable just going alone. But we do have advocates who are able to go with you. So some of the resources that we have here in Phoenix. So always in an emergency, call 911. The non-emergency Phoenix Police phone number is 602-262-3745. 6151. We also have the Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, also known as ACES DV. Their phone number is 602 279 2900. The National Sexual Assault Hotline, which is available 24/7, is 1-800-656-HOPE, HOPE. Also, the numeric version is 1-800-656-4673. The phone number for the Phoenix Family Advocacy Center, is 602-534-2120. So at this time, I would love to ask if there's any questions. And if not, you may contact me for either this presentation or for any additional information about sexual assault. My email address is Sarah, SARAH, .way, WAY, @phoenix.gov.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Doesn't look like there's any questions. So if there are, I will email them to you. But if not, then have a good night.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.